buttons and connections happen as you all filter in. I'm here to wish you a very good evening, and thank you so much for joining our very nature-filled live virtual event tonight with Rob Chaney, Cristina Eisenberg, and Doug Chadwick. I'm Jessica from the Country Bookshelf in Bozeman, Montana, on the unceded ancestral land of the Apsalaki Crow, Salish Kootenai, Cheyenne, Shoshone, Bannock, and Ochady-Chikowan people. We encourage those of you from joining us from outside Bozeman and Montana to learn about the stories of the people that, or the, to learn about the land that you occupy and the stories of its people. We are grateful to be here in this virtual space with our fellow Books in Common Northwest stores, Paulina Springs Books in Sisters, Oregon, and Madison Books in Seattle, Washington. Be sure to visit www.booksincommonNW.com to see more great events that we have coming up this month and next for Books in Common. And you can also purchase books, all of our speakers' books, if you didn't when you registered today. You can also follow us on Eventbrite for more great events. Before we get to our speakers, I do want to let you know a couple things about our virtual space. We are recording tonight's event, and it is being live streamed. You can purchase a copy of our authors, as I mentioned, booksincommonNW.com. That link just got dropped into the chat. Just click on the logo of your favorite sponsoring store, and you can purchase these two plus more, like Cristina Eisenberg's Carnivore Way and all sorts of fun stuff there. If you have any questions for our panelists as we go through the evening, you can drop them in the chat, or there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. That's a great place to look and see what questions other folks might have. And you can even vote for the question you want answered most. If you run into any tech issues, the easiest solution is generally to exit and re-enter the webinar. If that doesn't work, look for us on the Books in Common NW YouTube channel, where we are live streaming. And headphones, of course, work great for some of those sound issues that we can run into. I do want to remind everyone that this is a shared creative space, that we do want to remain safe for everyone who's joined us. So offensive or inappropriate comments will see the user dismissed. So all of the business out of the way, we'll get to the fun stuff. I'm going to introduce our authors tonight. We have Rob Chaney, a reporter from the Missoulian and lifelong Montanan. He covers science and the environment. His book is The Grizzly in the Driveway. So we'll hear more about that here in a moment. And we have Doug Chadwick, a wildlife biologist who carried out research on mountain goat ecology and social behavior atop the Rockies for years, and has assisted other scientists studying harlequin ducks, wolverines, grizzly bears, and whales. He's also a natural history journalist who has produced 14 popular books and hundreds of magazine stories. Many of his articles have been for the National Geographic Society on subjects from snow leopards high in the Himalayas to lowland rainforests and the underwater kingdoms of coral. A founding board member of the Vital Ground Foundation, a conservation land trust. You can visit vitalground.org to learn more about that. Chadwick also serves on the board of the Liz Claiborne Art Ortenberg, got tangled up in my syllables there, Foundation, which supports wildlife research and community-based conservation programs throughout the world. That's lcaof.org. And he lives in Whitefish, Montana. So we have a solid Montana crew tonight. Ecologist Cristina Eisenberg studies wolves, bison, and fire in the Rocky Mountain ecosystems and works to empower Native people to use traditional ecological knowledge to restore nature and create resilient, sustainable Earth. She is the former chief scientist at Earthwatch Institute, where she develops strategic initiatives to explore key environmental sustainability issues and establish partnerships with principal investigators. She's a Smithsonian Research Associate, a Boone and Crockett Club professional member, and a nonfiction editor of the literary journal Whitefish Review. As you can see, more Montana connections. She serves on the board of directors for the Society of Ecological Restoration, the board of trustees for Prescott College, and the editorial board of Oregon State University Press. She holds a PhD in forestry and wildlife from Oregon State, and her books for Island Press include The Carnivore Way, which you can find on booksincommonnw.com, and The Wolf's Tooth, Keystone Predators. Thank you, Rob, for being our Vanna White. Keystone Predators, Trophic Cascades, and Biodiversity. She lives with her family in a remote wild corner of Northwest Montana. So that was a lot of really inspiring credentials to get us started off with. So let me make it easy and say, Rob, why don't you take it away?
Jessica, thank you very kindly, and Country Bookshelf and everyone else involved in inviting me to be able to share the screen with two of my absolute best sources and kind of favorite people, and two people who the wildlife of this world owe a great debt to. I just finished my first book called The Grizzly in the Driveway. And just to give you a little insider book writing information that I never knew about, a book author generally doesn't get to pick their title. And I didn't know that when I originally proposed calling this book Waltzing with Bears. And the marketing department hated that. And what they wanted to call it was The Bear Under the Trampoline, because there was a picture that I had in my files of a woman who had complained publicly that if a grizzly bear shows up in a Glacier Park campground, the rangers will come and they will haze it off or capture it and move it into the boonies somewhere. But if that bear shows up in her driveway, it's her problem. And she backed it up with a Facebook post of a grizzly bear snoozing under her child's driveway. And she said, "This is why I am upset about this." And a friend of hers posted about how a grizzly known as Martha that was cruising in the Browning area of the Blackfeet Indian Reservation and had never become a conflict bear, was nevertheless getting close enough to people that it was prompting them to call wildlife services and other agencies trying to get rid of this bear, to get it out of their driveways. And at the same week, I got into a conversation with another friend in Condon, Montana, which is 60 odd air miles across the Continental Divide from Browning, who told me about a bear that was locally known as Windfall. And this grizzly bear was wandering into people's driveways, and the local folks were ecstatic. They were running out with their cell phones and getting video of this bear wandering through their driveway and posting it to their grandchildren and showing everybody what a wonderful circumstance this was, that they had a grizzly in their driveway. And it was so wonderful that the bear eventually got habituated to garbage and had to be killed by fish and game wardens because it had become a public safety hazard. And I brought this to the marketing folks and said, bear under a trampoline is way too many syllables, but a grizzly in the driveway is an actual thing. And it really shows the multiple ways that we have a relationship with wildlife, and particularly have a relationship with, as we call it, the charismatic megafauna of grizzly bears. And the more I poked at this, the more I realized that we is a very carefully used word. In this case, I mean we as in American citizens running a federal government are trying to decide how our relationship with a wild animal is going to progress in the case of a grizzly bear that is protected by the Endangered Species Act. But there are so many other ways to think about bears. And here is an example that I have on my desk. And this is a little carved bear made by a Salish Indian artist with a salmon in its mouth. But if you turn it around, It's a spirit animal. And if you dig into Native American cultures and virtually every other indigenous culture around the planet that has brown bears in their vicinity, the bear has this dual identity. A lot of people argue that it's because of the bear's hibernation. There we go with Doug's example, that it goes and disappears and maybe communes with the spirit world, is able to pass from reality to supernatural. But it is a transformational creature. A Shakespearean scholar friend of mine brought up a just amazing observation in Shakespeare's play, The Winter's Tale. For no particular plot reason, a major character right at the intermission point is eaten by a bear. There's the famous Shakespeare line, "Exit pursued by bear." The weird thing about The Winter's Tale is the first half of that play is a tragedy. The second half is a comedy. And it's divided by that introduction of a bear that has no other purpose in this story except to change it from tragedy to comedy. So the more I poked, the more I saw that bears are, as Walt Whitman liked to say, they contain multitudes. But we humans are, by our own definition and our own hubris, put in a position of determining the grizzly bear's fate. And so I wanted to find out why and how we base our ideas for our relationship with grizzly bears. Where do they come from? Are they our nightmares, our visions seen in our imaginations by the light of our Neolithic cave ancestors? Are they our biological references to a creature that is an omnivore that lives in a particular kind of mountain and plains environment and has a certain caloric need? Or are they some spiritual avatar and goal of what is right with the world if you encounter one and have it as part of your universe? We keep all those things in the back of our minds. We very rarely, I think, bring them forward and think, I react to a bear because I've built these structures in the back of my memory, in the back of my imagination. But we react and we decide. We won't go to Glacier Park because we can't relax because we know there are grizzly bears there. Or we will go to Glacier Park because we want to encounter a bear. And so I wanted to find out how we did this and why we built it up this way. And I've got to say at this point that I don't have any answers. I don't have any good explanations or guides about how you, the audience, ought to be making your choices. But I will push as hard as I possibly can to make you ask better questions. And my hope is that with The Grizzly in the Driveway, which is based on, in large part, the work of my colleagues to the right and left here, and their incredibly detailed science and personal observation and experience, that the more you know about where you get your ideas about bears, the better questions you will ask when the time comes to make decisions. And with that, I would love to turn it over to Doug, who has moved from 4/5 a grizzly to connecting us to virtually everything that lives.
Well, thanks. I was going to describe what my book is about, and I thought, yeah, I don't really know. God, I should know. I wrote it, but I think you did a pretty good job. Look, grizzly bears I've followed for decades, and I don't know why. I think it's because I feel alive at a level that probably goes way back to our ancestors. All my hormones and my senses, my reflexes are at a keen pitch Grizzlies just put you there. And I'm alive at a level I can't be in a lot of countrysides. And I guess you could say the same thing with other big bite yous out there. But the other thing I sense, having been able to watch bears at salmon streams and in comfortable situations where I'm very close. I've actually had one brush against my chest while it was moving by trying to get away from another bear. It's a no fear situation, but you start to see a fellow mammal that has one of the largest brains of any carnivore. It lives 35 years and it has a tremendous capacity for learning. So every time you generalize about a grizzly will do this or a grizzly will do that, you're right for some of them, and you're wrong for some of them, because they're as varied and individual in terms of their, I won't call them personalities, their bearalities are as different from one individual to the next as I find with people. And the longer I watch, the more that strikes me. So most bears we encounter are stories about people. They're about there I was and about me and about how I felt, what I want or fear or need a bear to be, and not about the bear. But I love bears also because they're great connectors. They fascinate me because they're great connectors. They are the reason we're starting to talk about ecosystem management in places like Yellowstone. Before, we had all these agencies managing their different turfs, trying to keep the last grizzlies alive in the 70s in Yellowstone Park when they were down to what, Rob, 250 maybe in the park, and realized we have to start talking to each other, we in the different land management resource agencies, if we're going to keep this big, wide roaming animal that uses all habitats. It's an omnivore. It uses all different elevations, and it ranges in a set. We have to take on the whole place because a lot of the habitats outside Yellowstone are much better than the park itself. It's also drove one of the great and model ecosystem management or large landscape management plans in the world. And that's the Yellowstone to Yukon initiative, 2,000 miles north-south connectivity from the Peel River and the Yukon down to south of Yellowstone and the Wind Rivers. So bears do that. And they make us think they're an umbrella for a whole community of species. If there's room for grizzlies, there's room for everybody else that belongs there in that native community of plants and animals. So most bears today, well, look, most extinctions in the world have taken place on islands, on oceanic islands, because they're small populations, they're vulnerable, they're isolated. And they can't go anywhere if there's a flood, a hurricane, a wildfire, a disease outbreak. They don't get replaced if the population get diminished, and they also are subject to inbreeding. So most extinctions since the year 1500 have been on oceanic islands. Most of the brown bears, which are the same as grizzlies, Ursus arctos, in the Northern Hemisphere today live on islands, surrounded by a sea of humanity that's increasing. The sea level is rising, let's say. And I'm talking about in places like Pakistan, in Mongolia, in the Himalayas. But here in the US, as you pointed out, Rob, bears we have a different culture. We have a different way of going about things. The positive part of that is we have brought them back from a low point in the 1970s when they were listed as endangered. And that we'll probably end up talking about all the problems associated with bear management, but we have to stop and pat ourselves on the back as a country for doing something that hasn't been done before, really, at this scale, that involved changes in our lifestyle, our land management, all kinds of things. And we have increased the number of bears, of one of the most formidable creatures that we've got sharing this continent. But This book is not 4/5 about grizzly bears. It's about a whole lot of creatures. And I'll just show you one more picture because it's one of my favorites. Okay. Bear with me, folks, as I thumb through to, can you see that? Sea angels, which are actually sea slugs, but they're marvelous. And my final one is a family photo right here. No. I am 96 to 98% a great ape. 98% in the case of chimpanzees. I am at least 80% a grizzly. I am 85% or so, a cow, a dog, 88% genetically identical to a mouse. I can go on. It would be 60% with fish, 30 to 40% with some insects, 20 to 30% with plants, 7% with bacteria, and 8% of the human genome is of viral origin from our ancestors dealing with different diseases, and those viruses or bacteria left parts of their DNA in us. It's been repurposed for different things. We'll put it this way, being one with nature sounds like an aspiration. It really isn't, because we already are. So, read one more thing. I am in a sense alive in a mind-boggling number of creatures in a staggering range of environments through shared DNA. I leap, I twine, I fly, I slither and ooze, I shimmer with iridescent scales in the seas off Zanzibar, and I stretch my petals toward the light in far northern Siberia. Being more closely related to avocados, ants, and aardvarks than most people suspect doesn't dilute our nature. It doesn't make us any less human, but instead it increases it many-fold, our stature. It renders us more than human. This is our deep heritage, an old, enduring relationship as big as the living world. I call it our greater selves. And my book is partly about trying to understand who and what we are. These are there are no bigger questions that I know of. And so, okay, why am I talking about that? Why am I taking on a big subject I'm probably not qualified for? But when I was in school learning about conservation, there were fewer than half as many people on this planet. We reached our first million in the year 12,000 BC. That's after 300,000 years of existence as Homo sapiens, as a species. We hit our first billion in 1800. Now we're about to be 8 billion. The percentage of large wild vertebrates on land, and mammals especially, is about 4%. The rest is humans and their livestock. Since 1970 and the half century since then, out of every 10 big animals living out there in the wild, 7 have disappeared. So this is terrifying stuff to me. I mean, we are denaturing the planet. We're terraforming it. We are changing the skies, the waters, and the land at a pace that threatens to cause the loss of a third to half of the species on the planet, the only living planet we know, within, well, by the end of this century. So we need to rethink our relationship with nature. We need to rethink who we are, because we don't understand it. We still view conservation of the living planet as an option. as a nice thing to do if you've got the time and the money. It's a special interest. It's a hobby. It's anything but no. It's who and what we are. We couldn't have any more nature stuffed in us if we tried, right? And I say that because, well, we have the idea of ourselves as separate from nature, as a species of a different quality. And we're very individual oriented, and we think we can probably do without a lot of nature. And the way I look at it is I have 30 trillion human cells. I started off as a microbe, by the way. I was 4/1000th of an inch in size. There were bacteria bigger than I was. As I was a fertilized egg, I became an adult with 30 trillion cells of human. But I have many more microbes than that in and on my body. And in each of those human cells, oh, by the way, they're doing my digestion for me. They're preventing me from getting sick from other diseases. They're digesting things I can't digest at all. They're producing vitamins. They're producing all kinds of hormones that may influence our thoughts, our moods. So we're just getting to know who we are and what we are. And inside each of our cells are these little organelles called mitochondria. And they are the battery packs that power living cells in every plant and every animal, in every creature above the level of bacteria. And they are modified cyanobacteria themselves. These 2 million years ago, cyanobacteria invented, this. However it was done, it invented the ability to exist within a larger single-celled animal that engulfed it. They became the mitochondria that power everything we feel, think, and do. We can't exist without them. So the question is, one more example. When I look at a tree out there, I see the tree. And we call it a tree, but we know what a lichen is. It's a combination of an algae and fungus. Turns out it's a combination of at least a couple kinds of fungus, cyanobacteria, algae, and it's where's the individual in that? Where's the individual in me and every other living creature? Where's the separation from nature? And the roots of that plant are about the size of the structure you see above ground, and they are all attached to 90% of all the plants identified so far are associated with mycorrhizal fungi, which form a symbiosis with the root hairs and then extend the root system by an order of 10, an order of magnitude, bringing back nutrients and water. That's how we get plants in all these really tough conditions and able to survive on deserts to mountaintops. Where is the individual there? And the chloroplasts that do the job of photosynthesis in all green plants are modified cyanobacteria that, again, in ancient times got engulfed by another one-celled animal, became algae, became plants that invaded land with the help of fungi, and then evolved into the plants we see around us today. There are no individuals in nature in that sense. And I feel as though after giving these statistics about the loss rate, the extinction rate we see around us, if we don't get past that border we've set up, our cultures, our societies have set up between us and all the rest of life, I don't think we can keep up. And I wrote this book because I have been looking at one animal at a time, one wild place at a time that needs attention. As a writer, I'm a cheerleader, I'm an arm waver for creatures that need help. But you can see the white hair. I don't have time to take on every individual species out there, or even a tiny share of them. And again, we're not going to go around crisis by crisis, endangered species by endangered species, and we're not going to win with that. We have to rethink who and what we are. So that's what I'm on about with this book. And the last things I'll say are, everything's a symbiont. We are symbionts. We are holobionts. Actually, we have multiple species that make us up. If you were to grind me up and analyze the mess that was left with a mass spectrometer, a tiny fraction of my DNA would be human, and all the rest would be microbial. We have 22,000 genes in the human body, but the microbes we harbor have 8 to 45 million. And so I'm just trying to come up with different ways to think of ourselves. And we have been through a reassessment of life and a reminder from the coronavirus that we are not separable from nature. And it's also worth pointing out that an estimated 800 million viruses fall onto each square yard of ground and ocean every day from the sky. It's the planet of the microbes. We live in it. We're adapted to it with our immune system. We incorporate them in different ways we never imagined. And we are genetically related to all those creatures out there, including, like I say, I look at a grizzly bear, I see the bear in me, and I see myself in the bear. So that's probably enough babbling for for one time. But am I over my allotted time, Jessica? Probably am. Hello?
I think you're looking good, and it looks like Cristina just unmuted to jump in on the conversation. So
good. Thanks for putting up with that. I have no idea what that sounded like, but probably people are thinking it's time for me to get help. But there it is.
There's another way to put what you just so eloquently described. That was awesome, Doug. And Rob, you described the conundrum that we find ourselves in as humans living in a broken world. So the Plains Indians call what Doug described Mitakuye Oyasin. That means all our relations. And that's the native science. That's the way Indigenous people all over the world have always seen the natural world. It's not nature over here and the animals in nature and humans over here. It's that what makes us humans is that these animals are not just our teachers, they're part of who we are. And in any Indigenous culture that you go into around the world, there are stories, beautiful, eloquent stories. There's stories about how these animals were here long before us, and that they gave birth to humans and taught us how to be human and how to survive, and that we knew nothing and we were foolish and stupid. And so I'm Native American, and I'm a very formally trained Western scientist. I study whole food webs. And as I started getting deeper into that science, I had some of my Indian friends say to me, Cristina, this is all such a no-brainer what you're studying. It's what we've known all along. So I started out looking at trophic cascades, which is trophic just means food, and food web relationships involving wolves, elk, aspen community, songbirds, so everything is connected. In the process of doing that work and being in the field, I quit counting when I hit 700 bear encounters, mostly with grizzly bears. And they were 95% of them were peaceful. Now, I'm a science nerd out there with my field crew out in off trail and working in national parks, national forests, places where people don't go normally, but where I know my ancestors went to forage. And these animals over and over again have treated us like family, and not in a romanticized, Henry David Thoreau, John Muir version of what that might be, but in ways that were astonishingly like how Indigenous people had experiences with these animals. I've worked in Mongolia, I've worked in Africa, I've worked in the deepest, darkest, wildest portion of the Amazon, doing field work, mainly with large carnivores. And the Indigenous people there have, there's this astonishing universality of these themes of what does it mean to share the planet and live in the planet respectfully with these wild animals. And so my knowledge comes from, not from book learning, it comes from those direct experiences and from listening to stories that the elders have shared with me and with my field crews, with all those bear encounters. And our relationships with these animals is broken. What happened is that colonialism, the Romans, Euro-Americans colonized the New World. They replaced these ancient relationships between humans and animals. They were, always in place, these relationships. They replaced them with this, with capitalism, this version of let's command and control and exploit for our benefit. And they did that to Indigenous people. They exploited us. They took away our lands. They killed all the bison, et cetera, et cetera. All the grizzly bears, all the wolves, got rid of fire because all of these things were inconvenient and needed to be controlled. In the process, they created ecological wreckage. They genocide. The genocide wasn't just humans killing humans, it was humans killing animals. And so today we are working very hard to heal that damage. And I argue that the best way to do that is by tapping into those old, traditional truths, that wisdom, by listening to what those animals have to say. That's a lot easier said than done in a world where there's humans are invading even the wildest corners of Montana, building homes, developing. And so these animals are being displaced and having to learn new ways of living with people. I will say though that these animals, I tell people about bears, bringing this back to bears, that bears are a lot kinder to humans and nicer to humans than humans are to each other. They're incredibly generous with us if we give them a chance. Every animal, whether it's a bear or a jaguar or, a wolverine, in my books, I write about, what is the real grizzly bear? What is the real wolf? And there's these romanticized notions that are very European. And they were notions that were popularized by people like Thoreau and Emerson and John Muir and many others. And then there's the real bear. And Native people, we know that a bear is a bear. And a bear, there is no formula for what is a bear and how does a bear behave. I tell people when I train my field crews, I say every bear is as unique as people are, as each individual human is. So when you have a meeting with a bear, you listen to that animal, you read its body language, his or her body language, and you don't, impose your Western knowledge on that animal. You listen. That's how our ancestors did this. So I did have an encounter with a bear in my driveway about 10 days ago. And I was packing my field vehicle. I'm getting ready to go into the field. And I always have bear spray. So I should add that I live at the north end of the Swan Valley in Montana, in a place where the density of grizzly bears is greater than the density of humans. And I've lived here for 25 years, and for the most part, had very peaceful relations with these bears. So I always carry bear spray though, and that's because I care about the bears and want them to be safe. And, you know, we just always have bear spray with us when we walk out our front door, like walking to our garage. So I had my bear spray with me, and I looked up, and there's this black bear, very large, probably a male. I had seen the bear the day before. I was on a Zoom call, and I was looking at, right now, the light in my face is from the view, and that's of the Swan Range and the Bob Marshall beyond that. So there was a bear that was walking, scent marking against our fenced yard. And that's not a normal thing, you know, and the bear did it, and it was that large black bear. He did it for like half an hour. That's a habituated animal, because I live in the wilderness pretty much. And so that bear had myriad other options and amazing foods out there. So the next day I'm loading my vehicle, I look up and there's that same bear, and it's walking toward me, and it's sniffing the air for food, for human food. And I had been in my garage, where I have a freezer full of game, meat, and provisions for our project. And I had my bear spray in my hand. So I looked at the bear, and the bear made eye contact with me. That is another sign that that bear is asserting itself. And he's moving his head around like this, sniffing and looking at me, and keeps walking. But, you know, I'm 5'1". Doug knows how big I am, you know, I'm just like this normal kind of person, small woman. And I just kept my energy really calm. And my heart rate never went up. I did not have any adrenaline rush. I just calmly regarded the bear. And the bear looked at me, what got to be about maybe 20 feet away from me, and then realized maybe I don't belong here. Maybe I should just go back into the forest. And he did. In all of these years, I've never had to use my bear spray, not once. Do I have it with me? You bet, everywhere. So there's a lesson there about relationships. And Rob, in his book, does a great job of describing the complexity of these relationships that we have with bears in Montana. Doug has forever, in all of his writing, explored the complexities and the nuances of our relationships with animals and why we should protect them and coexist with them. And I'm just that nerd with her feet on the ground, trying to parse this Western science with traditional ecological knowledge to help us find a better way. It is really wonderful to be sharing this time with the two of you. So thank you for inviting me to participate.
So I have a question for both of you. As people who are making more of their careers doing science, and science as a profession is a slow, patient grind. You need to spend a lot of time working on your things, and then a lot of time studying and interpreting your things, and a lot of the things that you're watching take time to happen. I've got this page from the Wolf's Tooth, that this map of North America shows the carnivore presence across the North American continent in the number of species that were there. And this shows the contraction of those species.
Yeah, the first one is circa Lewis and Clark, so around 1800 or so. 1903. And the other one was a map that a colleague of mine created in the year 2006. Yes.
So we're looking, you know, at a couple of centuries of progress here. And then I got Doug's book, and you can tell I like visual aids here. This is an awesome use of graphics. I'm going to try to show this here. This is the human population in 10,000 BCE. And we do nothing until about 50 years ago. And then we go like this.
Mm-hmm.
That is an exponential growth trend. And if you think that that's, you know, weird, funky math or something, remember what happened last year when we were trying to get our heads wrapped around the spread of coronavirus and how fast it went from nothing to ICUs and hospitals are collapsing. That's exponential growth pattern. So what I'm wondering as professional scientists, in the three of our careers, the three of our professional lifetimes, we've gone from dial-up telephones to these babies, where I have in my hand more computing power than we used to put Neil Armstrong on the moon. And I use it for watching cat videos and various other less than world-shattering effects. How do we take something as slow and careful and, I gotta say, ponderous as science and apply it to a world that is evolving at this exponential rocket rate? How do you get your message across to people and make them realize that they need to ramp up their natural understandings as much as their ability to play with YouTube?
Can I take a stab at it?
Fire at will.
Well, I'm not bright enough to answer that in any kind of full sense, but it's an opportunity to point out something really interesting to me. As environmentalists, we've tried scolding people, we've tried making them feel guilty, we've tried alarming them, and none of this seems to be changing the game or the pace at which nature is being denatured. But the interesting thing is I was in Japan 3 different times, and the last time I was there, I got into forest bathing, which is Shinrin-yoku. It's immersing yourself in nature with all your senses. And it's gaining some traction here in the West because, but it takes on all kinds of woo-woo Zen effects and so on from California going north. But doctors are increasingly recommending time outdoors, time in nature, time in contact with nature. And study after study shows that contact with nature increases health significantly and increases longevity. These are studies from the UK, from Australia, from the US, from a number of places. It's study after study, and it says if you are in a natural setting, time spent there, it can be as little as 20 minutes, 3 days a week, but your heart rate slows, your blood pressure drops, your immune system strengthens, the anxiety and the stress that cause medical problems for as many as 1/3 of Americans today, they're diminished. And cognitive function, the way your brain works, changes from intense focus and the stress that comes with it to a relaxed awareness and better problem solving. So this is not me giving an opinion on why we need to be outdoors, why we need to save nature. This is me saying, would you like to be healthier and live longer? And you don't get many no's on that. So no matter what it's what I was trying to get across earlier when I geeked out on everybody, but we're naturals, and they don't know all the reasons for these physiological changes. They just know they happen. It's scientifically proven, and I'm sure it has to do with our old deep heritage. And remember, in 99.99% of our hominid evolution, people didn't go into the wild. There was nothing but wild, and we were in natural settings. And I think what is happening is your body and mind and whatever else is just saying, I'm home. And so the simple thing, it's the strongest argument I've heard. If you exercise provides many of those same benefits. So what could be better than time outdoors in contact with nature plus exercise? In other words, a good hike in Montana. What more can you do for yourself to live better and improve the quality of life? And we're still arguing over whether we should, we have all these polarized opinions. Should we protect this area, or, well, we have to compromise. It's like we have very few wild animals left on the planet. They're decreasing, but people are saying, well, there's two sides to this. And it's like, well, there were maybe at some point, but we're way past it. And it can be, they get these same effects of forest, I call it forest bathing, but contact with nature from people just looking at pictures of nature, just gardening, just looking. Anyway, you can be going by a small urban park, and all those same things happen when you go into it. So from creating little neighborhood green spaces to working with land trusts to preserve some of the suburban acreage around towns, to protecting wildlands on a bigger scale, is one of the best things we can do for, an interest group that includes everybody on Earth. So just a thought.
So that is a great argument as well for citizen science. And that's what Earthwatch was all about, was that scientists bringing in people to volunteer. And that's what Earthwatch facilitated. And by connecting people with nature to collect data that was rigorous data. And we had a project, we still have it in Mongolia, that was about that. But that's a very powerful model for engagement and to build exchange of knowledge rather than holding it all in an ivory tower. The problem with science is that most scientists are, they're not very nice people. They're very arrogant. They think they know everything, and they hold all of their knowledge really tight. And I am trying to model a different way of doing science, that we're just humans and we really don't know very much. That complexity you described, Doug, is we know this much about how this whole big world operates as scientists. So to pretend that we know what we're doing, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm just following these animal trails and listening and applying best Western science. But to share our stories as scientists, that's why I write books. And I encourage my students, my graduate students, the other scientists I work with, I try to hold them accountable for communicating, for being human, for you learn more. I always tell people I learn as much from all the people I'm with, like the members of a tribe on a reservation, than anything that I can teach them. And so I get insights that shape the science that I'm doing, and I acknowledge them. So science does take a long time, but it doesn't take a long time to communicate about it, whether it's in books, whether it's by giving these talks like this, and having conversations, humanizing your science, bringing it down to earth, all of those things combined. Science is vital though, because we're dealing with things like shifting laws for how we protect grizzly bears and other critters with sharp teeth and claws. And without that science, it becomes a free-for-all. So we just need to work together to find a way to deliver that science in a much more expedient manner, not in a biased manner, but science, if it's done right, is the truth. And it may only be a little sliver of the truth, but it may be that piece of data, such as that grizzly bears are being negatively impacted by climate change. So that needs to be part of our management plan.
Totally agree. And I'm percolating all of these wonderful book recommendations. So the dovetail, I'm like the stack of books that need to accompany these two out into the world. It just keeps getting taller and taller as I listen to you guys. And since we are in Montana, at least the four of us on screen, I did want to point out that the Montana Land Reliance in 2019 had finally made it to 1 million acres of protected land trust. And there is also a really wonderful organization based here in Bozeman called Adventure Scientists that is working to do the citizen science and citizen data gathering. And they've got a couple great initiatives that you can find on their website. So we are coming close to our time. So if you have any questions for our panelists, drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A, and I will be the bookseller in the room again and say, what are you reading these days? Or Cristina, maybe for you, what book do you take into the field?
I've got a lot of traditional ecological knowledge about plants and animals with me. I've got lots of public policy books. I do a lot of policy involving Native American sovereignty rights and natural resources. And I've got, my background academically is equally plants and wildlife. And so I've got a spectrum of books on those. And then I've got amazing novels like the Erdrich novels and Beloved Beasts. I haven't read it yet, and I'm taking that into the field with me. And Chad's book, your book, Doug, definitely. Yeah. And this book, I'm recommending it to my field crew because there are a lot of bears in our study site, and people who don't live around bears have a hard time wrapping their brains around it. And so I recommend Grizzly in the Driveway, and also Doug Peacock's book. His grizzly bear books are excellent.
Yes.
I've got
Rob, it looked like you were reaching for something. Do we get more visual aids?
I was hoping I had them handy, but they're a little bit beyond my reach. The two that have been really provocative for me. One is called Billionaire Wilderness, and a look at what's been going on in Jackson Hole and Big Sky, where people with humongous amounts of money and arguably good intentions to spend it on the things that they love in the wild country are setting the agenda in ways that can be incredibly counterproductive. So, for example, when they are very quick to show up and throw down hundreds of thousands of dollars to donate to a bike path through Grand Teton National Park, but they won't pay or give any money to the food bank for the people who can't live in Jackson Hole, but provide all the lattes and the hamburgers. That's one that has just been fascinating to me. And the other one is called Nature's God. And this is a look that goes right back to I can't drag this one out, the Declaration of Independence. which starts off with we are, if I can find the exact part of it. But the American experiment was founded on nature and nature's God. And this book looks at the philosophical backgrounds of that and how it is very much different from the religious infrastructure that ran an awful lot of the rest of the American experiment. It was actually tied into the whole concept that we can get away from monarchies and religious institutions by focusing more on things that are beyond those simple human creations. And when you see the history that went into that idea, which has kind of then got shoved back behind the curtain again, it really lays a foundation for what I hear Cristina talking about, that you need to get beyond your human assumptions and your human hubris of controlling this planet like a terrarium with a bunch of levers and knobs, and look at the bigger picture. Look at nature's God in the sense of that old colonial fashion. Look at your NAPI or your other bigger organization where the people need to talk to the persons, as I see it formulated in a lot of Indian stories. Doug?
Well, on Christina's comment about how much we know of the natural world, I've been reading some of the history of, well, I've always been reading about the history of science and ideas. And the thing that I come away with as a generalism is every generation going back centuries tends to feel like, okay, we didn't used to understand how things work, and now we do. If you take mercury combined with gunpowder, it'll cure your syphilis. Or if the patient's sick, you bleed them or put it on leeches, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we're in that same stage. We always are. It's not demeaning science in the least. That's how we work our way towards a better understanding, but we always are ahead of ourselves in complimenting ourselves on having figured a lot of stuff out. And I don't know what a quark is. I don't know how gluons work. We don't know whether matter is matter or energy or a particle or a wave. And we don't know the role of viruses we used to think all change in nature happens from random mutations. Now it's looking like there can be changes during an animal's lifetime that are passed on genetically, called epigenetics. We're finding that viruses and bacteria transfer whole traits from not only one related species to another, but from one family of species to a whole different group of species. So I just say a reminder that to be transforming the planet at the rate we are, knowing how little, knowing very little, but thinking we know enough is possibly, it's the kind of mistake that's going to make for a very, very uncomfortable future. It's an existential problem.
Definitely. Rob, I'm curious, because I feel like there often does feel like that sense of divide between places of the West and not of the West in the ways that we think about nature and the way we think about bears and all of those sorts of things. And I'm curious how it was working with an editor who's not from Montana. And in terms of editing the book, and did you get any pushback or anything like that with the stories that you were including in Grizzly in the Driveway?
For the record, my editors were from the West.
Okay.
But I did spend an awful lot of time bouncing these ideas off people in Boston. I got to spend a year there just a little while ago, and just ran into some fascinating perspective issues. When I was working on the story of the grizzly in the driveway, and I'd tell people that at a cocktail party or something, and their immediate response in Boston was, "Can you believe, do you trust that woman who was upset about the grizzly in her driveway? I can't believe the government wouldn't come and take care of that." That was their just gut response. And I was working on another story about hunting, one of my few bear incidents where my brother and I were up in the Blackfoot Clearwater game wildlife management area. I won a permit to hunt there. And we were staking out a valley and hoping that some elk might move through, and right at dawn and the lights coming on, and I start hearing this, and I'm thinking, oh my God, this has got to be a huge elk. And my brother, who didn't have the permit, was down in the aspen thicket, hoping to be able to herd for me or something. It was a pretty dumb strategy. But the goes right past him, and he never sees it. And the light comes up, the morning's gone, we blew it, so we leave, and as we're walking out of this little basin, we come across the biggest pile of grizzly scat I've ever nearly stepped in. And I realized that it was purely my brother's bad taste that probably saved his life, because that grizzly did actually kill another hunter 2 days later in a dispute over an elk carcass. So I'm telling this story and to a director in Boston. We were working on turning this into a stage sort of a tell me something performance. And the director just couldn't handle the idea that I might be killing my own meat, or that I might be becoming part of the food chain that something else might decide to consume. That was such a foreign concept to these urban residents, for whom I kind of realized that in their case, nature is the tree that's growing out of the sidewalk. Nature is the Boston Commons and the swans floating around on the pond. And the idea of forest bathing that Doug's talking about, or even the wilder idea of spending a summer in a field camp and paying attention to everything that goes on, is just. But the crucial thing that I took away from that is the asymmetrical power that we, the four of us right here, have. If you think about Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho have a combined population that would fit in a small suburb of Los Angeles. But we have 3 times the power in Congress that California does, because of the way the Senate works. We have humongous influence over these people in the coasts, in the gigantic part of the American population that all lives in urban cities, who have no experience with what we spend our days with, forest bathing and field tripping. And yet they are going to be in charge of the fate of the grizzly bear by the sheer numbers.
Well, I feel like that's, oh, sorry, Doug.
No, go ahead, Jessica.
I was going to say that seems like a perfect reason to pick up both of these books, and send them to your senators and send them to your Congress people, both in a state level and in a national level, because there is a lot of and we briefly in the green room before we started broadcasting, we were talking about some of those actions that are happening and how folks need to be aware and actionable in protecting what we value.
Okay, what I was going to say was I forget what it is. It's above 80%, isn't it, Rob, of Americans live in major urban areas.
80% of Americans are on, I think, 5% of it.
And well, and by the way, we have 84% of the same genes dogs do, and wolves. The other figure here for me is the average American spends 87% of his or her time indoors in an enclosed setting, and another 6% in an enclosed form of transportation. So that's 93% of their lives indoors. And we're here in an environment where I can hardly help thinking of the average American as being more like a Montanan or Idaho or, somebody I know in the West. It just, and you realize what a gap there is between us trying to communicate some of these ideas and how most people are living. And it's a real challenge to communicate science but the passion we all feel for the outdoors and for the presence of wild animals. I think that's like we're speaking a different language than the average person out there and the average politician. So you brought up a really important point, Rob, and I don't have a solution. I'm just pointing it out.
It's the language of the wild. And I know that the four of us have had decades, and in some cases a whole lifetime, of deep immersion in wild landscapes, and that for some of us it's our life's work. For others it's just our backyard. And this is, like Rob growing up in Montana, it's embedded in who you are, that sensibility. And I worked in Boston for 5 years and was at Harvard, and I had those same conversations at at dinners and such. And it's like I came back from the Lewis and Clark expedition. Tell us about what is it like to run into a wolf in the wild? And so I think it's that deep immersion in wildness and how to convey that. And your writing, Doug, and the book you just wrote, and I hope you write more books, Rob, demystify that and demythologize it, because it's the myth of the wild, and how somebody sitting in Seattle or Connecticut has these visions of how the wild should be managed and conserved. And it's another form of colonialism, really. That's how the Native people see it. Meanwhile, having a conversation with you, Doug, or you, Rob, about the wild, it's like it's real. And and so that genuine sense of the wild, I think writing is so important. And many of the books that you sell at Country Bookshelf are all about that. Like, people like Rick Bass and, Doug Peacock and David Quammen. And, so I think we need to tell our stories. We need to tell them and keep telling them. And the book is not dead, really. Books are vital. So anyway, I'll stop. I know it's getting late, but it's wonderful to share this space with all of you.
I just got to add, if anybody from another state, especially an urban area or largely urban state, wants to understand how those few of us, that suburb of LA total of people living out in the Rockies, how we think and why. So, there are all these controversies swirling around things. I think Rob's book gets at it as well as one can. It's a great introduction with points of view from Native Americans to, the anti-predator gang, but it's genuine. There's a real people, and it comes across. So Rob, that you deserve a real, the gold star on your forehead there.
Yep.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Again, if you haven't picked up your copy of our books tonight, do be sure to visit booksincommonnw.com and just click on the logo of your favorite sponsoring store to find books from Rob and Doug and Cristina. Visit your local bookstore. I'm sure you'll spot them there as well. And you will find them here at Country Bookshelf, right out in the front aisle, as we welcome all sorts of new folks who are hopefully coming to explore our wild places. So without further ado, thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. And thank you to our panelists for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you very kindly.
Yeah, thank you.